Imagine waking up in a strange bed, in a strange room, with no way out. You haven't committed a crime. You haven't hurt anyone. But someone, maybe even someone you love, has signed a piece of paper, and now you belong to the institution. This wasn't fiction. This was the reality for hundreds of thousands of people across America and Europe just 1 century ago. And what happened inside those walls is far stranger, far darker, and in some moments, far more well-intentioned than you might expect. By the early 1900s, psychiatric hospitals, then called lunatic asylums or sanatoriums, were everywhere. In the United States alone, hundreds of state institutions housed tens of thousands of patients. The idea, at least on paper, was humane. Remove the suffering person from the chaos of ordinary life, place them somewhere calm and ordered, and they would heal. But the gap between the idea and the reality was enormous, and it started with the question nobody could actually answer. What even causes mental illness? Doctors at the turn of the 20th century were working almost completely in the dark. They had no brain scans, no neuroscience, no understanding of neurotransmitters. The dominant theories were wild by today's standards. Many believed mental illness was caused by moral weakness. Too much sexual activity, too much drinking, not enough discipline. Others thought it was hereditary degeneracy. Some believed it was caused by physical infection lurking somewhere in the body. And each theory spawned its own terrifying cure. One of the most influential and devastating theories came from a respected American physician named Henry Cotton. Cotton was not a sadist. He genuinely believed he was saving people. His theory, mental illness was caused by focal sepsis, pockets of infection hiding in the body. Remove the infection, he believed, and the madness would disappear. It sounded almost logical. And so Cotton started removing things. First, it was teeth. Cotton and his team pulled the teeth of thousands of psychiatric patients at Trenton State Hospital in New Jersey, convinced that rotting roots were poisoning the brain. When that didn't work, and it frequently didn't, he moved further into the body. Tonsils came next, then sections of the colon, then the cervix, then the stomach. Patients had organs removed one after another, all in the name of curing their depression or psychosis. The mortality rate from these surgeries was staggering. Some estimates suggest it reached 30% or higher at certain points. And yet Cotton was celebrated. He lectured at Princeton, he published papers. The psychiatric establishment applauded him for years. Here's the part that should unsettle you most. Cotton wasn't a rogue operator hiding in a basement. He was mainstream. And this tells you something crucial about how science goes wrong. Not through malice, but through confirmation bias. When patients recovered, Cotton credited the surgery. When they didn't, he said more surgery was needed. There was no control group. There was no one checking his numbers carefully enough until a researcher named Phyllis Greenacre conducted a quiet investigation and found the death toll. Even then, the institution closed ranks around him. But not every asylum was a house of horrors. In Britain and parts of Europe, a different model had taken root, one that emphasized rest, nature, and what they called moral therapy. Wealthy patients at private sanatoriums in the English countryside received warm baths, long walks, gentle conversation, good food, and a structured daily routine. For many of them, this actually helped. Modern psychiatrists who look back at these records note that what the rich were getting was essentially early cognitive behavioral therapy, routine, human connection, reduced stress. The tragedy is who this was reserved for. In the public state hospitals, patients were often 50 or 100 to a ward. There was one nurse for dozens of patients. There was no individualized care. There was barely enough food. Patients were sometimes restrained, tied to beds with leather straps, or locked in rooms called seclusion cells. The beautiful theory of moral therapy collapsed under the weight of overcrowding, underfunding, and social prejudice. If you were poor or an immigrant, or a woman deemed hysterical, your experience of the asylum was almost unrecognizable from the spa-like retreats of the wealthy. Then there was hydrotherapy, and this one is genuinely strange. The idea was that water, applied in the right way, could calm or stimulate the nervous system. Some hospitals wrapped agitated patients in wet sheets and packed them in ice. Others immersed them in continuous warm baths for hours, sometimes days, with canvas sheets keeping them semi-submerged, just their head above water. Some patients reportedly found the prolonged warm baths calming. Others experienced it as torture. The line between treatment and punishment was, to put it gently, blurry. And then came electricity. In 1938, two Italian physicians, Ugo Cerletti and Lucio Bini, developed electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. The inspiration came from a slaughterhouse. Cerletti had noticed that pigs were rendered temporarily unconscious by electric shocks before being killed. He wondered if controlled electrical seizures might somehow reset the brain. The first human patient was a confused, disoriented man found wandering in a Rome train station. After a series of electrical shocks, his confusion cleared. The doctors called it a success. Within years, ECT had spread around the world. Now here's where the story gets more complicated, and where the easy narrative of barbaric past versus enlightened present starts to crack. Early ECT was often administered without anesthesia, without muscle relaxants. Patients experienced the full force of the seizure. Bones were sometimes broken. Memory could be severely damaged. It was frightening, and it was frequently used not because the patient needed it, but because it made them easier to manage. And yet ECT, when properly administered with modern safeguards, is still used today. For certain forms of severe treatment-resistant depression, it remains one of the most effective tools psychiatry has. The treatment was real. The early implementation was often brutal. But the most infamous chapter of this era was still coming. In 1935, a Portuguese neurologist named Egas Moniz introduced what he called a leucotomy, a surgical severing of connections in the frontal lobe of the brain. His idea: violent, disturbed patients had overactive emotional circuitry. Cut the connections, calm the patient. In some of his original patients, the results seemed remarkable. Agitated, suicidal patients became quieter, more manageable. Moniz won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1949. Then, an American physician named Walter Freeman took the idea and turned it into something else entirely. Freeman developed what he called the transorbital lobotomy, a procedure that could be done in minutes, without a full surgical team, using an instrument that resembled an ice pick, inserted through the eye socket into the frontal lobe. Freeman toured the country performing lobotomies in state hospitals, sometimes doing dozens in a single day, with no anesthesia beyond electroconvulsive shock. His patients included a 23-year-old woman named Rosemary Kennedy, sister of the future president, who was left permanently incapacitated. Rosemary Kennedy's story is heartbreaking and illuminating in equal measure. She had been an active, spirited young woman, perhaps with a mild intellectual disability and mood swings. Her father, Joseph Kennedy, authorized the lobotomy without telling her mother. After the procedure, Rosemary lost the ability to speak clearly, to walk properly, to live independently. She spent the rest of her life in an institution. She was 23 years old. She lived to 86. And her family kept her existence secret for decades, itself a window into how the mentally ill and the intellectually disabled were hidden away, even by the powerful. By the early 1950s, American state hospitals held over 500,000 patients, the highest number in history. The institutions were vastly overcrowded. They were understaffed. Many were cruel, not through intent but through sheer incapacity. And doctors were desperate for something, anything, that would actually work. They tried insulin coma therapy, inducing hypoglycemic coma with the belief it might reset the brain. They tried prolonged sleep therapy. They tried fever therapy, deliberately infecting patients with malaria to induce high fever, a method that actually won its inventor, Julius Wagner Jauregg, a Nobel Prize in 1927 for treating syphilitic psychosis. The desperation was real. The suffering it caused was also real. And then, in 1952, everything changed, not with a scalpel or an electrode, but with a small white pill. A French surgeon named Henri Laborit noticed that a new antihistamine called chlorpromazine made surgical patients unusually calm, not sedated but detached, indifferent to their anxiety. A psychiatric colleague tried it on a manic patient who had been admitted in a state of extreme agitation. Within days, the man was calm enough to hold a conversation. Within weeks, he was discharged. Psychiatrists across France called it a chemical lobotomy. They meant it as a compliment. Chlorpromazine, sold as Thorazine in America, changed everything. Within a few years, Thorazine was being administered to hundreds of thousands of patients in asylums across the United States and Europe. The effect was undeniable. For many patients with schizophrenia and severe psychosis, the loudest, most chaotic symptoms quieted. Wards that had been almost ungovernable became manageable. Some patients, for the first time in years, could hold a conversation, recognize their family, think in something like a straight line. It was genuinely revolutionary, and it had a dark side too. The drug was overused, used as chemical restraint, used to make institutions easier to run rather than to help the patient. The pharmaceutical revolution helped trigger another massive shift: deinstitutionalization. If drugs could stabilize people, the thinking went, they didn't need to be warehoused in asylums. And there was political will. Institutions were expensive, and civil rights advocates were increasingly challenging the legality of indefinite psychiatric commitment. Through the 1960s and 70s, state hospitals across America emptied. Hundreds of thousands of patients were discharged. It was framed as liberation, and for some, it genuinely was, but for many others, there was nowhere to go. Community mental health centers were promised and underfunded. Here's the twist that reframes a lot of what came before. We did not solve the problem. We redistributed it. Today, the largest provider of psychiatric care in the United States is not a hospital. It's the jail system. More people with serious mental illness are incarcerated than are receiving inpatient psychiatric treatment. The asylum era was brutal and misguided in many ways. But the empty asylums did not mean empty suffering. The suffering found new addresses: the streets, the shelters, the prisons. The container changed. Which brings us to a genuinely uncomfortable question. We look back at the focal sepsis removals, the ice pick lobotomies, the malaria fever treatments, and we feel a mix of horror and superiority. But how much of what we do today will look equally baffling in 100 years? We still don't fully understand the biological causes of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression. We prescribe medications that work for reasons we can't entirely explain. We have treatments that help, but we don't have cures. The history of psychiatry is not a story of darkness followed by enlightenment. It's a story of people trying desperately to help, and sometimes causing harm in proportion to their certainty. Many of the great asylums still stand. Some are luxury apartments now, some are museums, some are derelict, their wards echoing with something that feels like memory. When you walk through one of those hallways and run your hand along the old stone, you're touching a place where real human beings, mothers, brothers, veterans, artists, teenagers spent years or decades of their lives. Some of them were genuinely mentally ill and desperately needed help. Some were committed for reasons that had nothing to do with illness: being gay, being an inconvenient wife, being an immigrant who didn't speak the language of the examining doctor. One woman, named Elizabeth Packard, was committed to an Illinois asylum in 1860, not because she was mentally ill, but because she disagreed with her husband's theology. Her husband, a minister, had the legal right under Illinois law to commit his wife without a hearing. She spent 3 years inside. When she was released, she became one of the first patient rights advocates in American history, successfully lobbying for legislation requiring a jury trial before psychiatric commitment. She was fighting for what we now consider basic dignity. A century and a half ago, it was a radical idea. The distance between that locked ward and a modern therapy room is enormous. And it is not nothing. We have genuine treatments now. Medications that help millions of people live full lives, psychotherapies with decades of evidence behind them, an emerging understanding of the brain that would have seemed like science fiction to those 1920s doctors. Real progress has happened. But if history teaches us anything, it's that certainty is psychiatry's most dangerous tool. The doctors who removed teeth and organs were certain. The doctor who performed 10,000 lobotomies was certain. Certainty without humility has always been where the damage starts. So next time you hear someone say we used to lock up anyone who was different, remember it's both simpler and more complicated than that. Yes, institutions were used as tools of social control. Yes, treatments were sometimes experiments dressed as cures. And yes, real people who were genuinely suffering also walked through those gates. And some of them did get help, imperfect and strange as it was. The history of mental health is the history of humanity trying to understand its own mind. And we are still very much in the middle of that story. Which leaves you with this. If the doctors of 1920 were convinced they were doing good, and many of them genuinely were, what does that mean for us? Not to paralyze us with doubt, but to keep us honest. The brain is the most complex object we know of in the universe. We have learned an enormous amount about it. We have not learned nearly enough. 100 years from now, what will they shake their heads about when they look back at us? Think about that question. It's not a comfortable one, but it might be the most important one we can ask.